Well, there's a saying that goes, if God brings you to it, He will bring you through it. And that most definitely describes our guest today. From a cozy Canadian farmhouse to Senegal, West Africa, to founding Foods Resource Bank, an organization that helps people have the dignity of feeding and educating their own children. Bev Abma has seen God's provision from what she calls unpredictable and unusual sources. Bev, welcome to 100 Huntley Street.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you, Bev. Now, I happen to know that trusting God for you actually was not difficult because when you were growing up, your parents modeled that kind of lifestyle.
That's true, they did. I was one of 3 children growing up in Alberta and grew up in a Christian home, but that had influences of many different walks of looking at Christianity, and I think prepared me for what God would have me do in meeting people from all over the world later on.
Now, I find it interesting, though, that you say that early on, it wasn't until you were in high school that you really were faced with the fact that, do I know God in a personal way, or is this something that I've just watched? Because your friends were all saying, now, what was the exact day that you, did heart business with God, and you couldn't pinpoint an exact day?
That's right. That's right. It was like God had always been there in my life. I guess I'm more of a Timothy than a Paul, and just having grown up with the influence of family and friends, and then really being assured that I didn't need to know the exact day and moment when I was very ill with the loss of our second baby, and when I wasn't sure whether I was going to live the next 24 hours, but having this deep sense of peace that whatever happened, it was fine and I was God's child. And since then I've never doubted, and that has been really helpful in all of my life since then.
So share with us a bit about the journey after you got married and kind of some of the paths that God had you and your husband go on.
Okay, well, I was a pediatric nurse out in Edmonton, and my husband was working for a medical lab, setting up labs and working with their stock supplies. And we were married for almost 6 years before we had a living child, and then we had another 5 years until we had another one. And was shortly after the birth of our second child, there was an ad in our church bulletin, could someone be found to help with the work in Fort McMurray with the mission area there. So we went there, and while we were there, there was an ad in the Christian Reformed Church magazine for a nurse for the church Christian Reformed World Relief Committee in West Africa. And my husband said, you need to apply, you're the nurse. And I said, us go to Africa with 2 little kids? I don't think so. And so he let it go, because we always said if God wanted us to do something, we'd both be in agreement. Well, God used a lot of different things to show me that I needed to trust Him and be willing to do that. And we ended up going to the Dominican Republic instead, and we served there for 3 years with the Christian Reformed World Relief Committee. I was the one hired. My husband came as the spouse, which was a really challenging experience in a Latino culture, but he always felt that he always encouraged me to be who God wanted me to be, and encouraged me to do all those things in life, like doing your own taxes and things, because you never know when you'll have to do it. And so we were in the Dominican Republic for 3 years, went back to Canada, and then in 1994, again went with the Christian Reformed World Relief Committee to West Africa, where I served as their regional director in their development work there.
Now that's really something else. That's real trust, to just pick up everything and go to the other side of the world and just head out and go. And boy, what was going through your mind to make a decision like that?
Well, part of it was that our children, we were supposed to go to Sierra Leone, and our children would have had to live in a boarding school. And after having been married so long without children, it was like, how can we just let them go like this? But it was God wanting me to say, it's okay, I'll give them to you and trust you. That then the plans changed so we could go to the Dominican Republic, where they could live at home. And so that was, I think, just evidence that you can trust God throughout all aspects.
And I find it interesting, Bev, that through it all, it was your husband, Hank, who was really encouraging you to break out of your comfort zone, to take that step of faith. He was a man that was always ready to say yes to God. In fact, I think you brought a wedding picture. We want to look back to, I think, 1968.
68. Okay. Oh,
There's Bev and Hank. And then fast forward a few years to a more recent picture. This was in 1996 of your family.
Now, you were in Africa at this time.
Yes, we were living in Senegal. I was working in several countries in West Africa. Again, we went because of my job, and then Hank started working with a Christian mission school there. And then a year and a half after we were there, just 2 weeks after this picture, he was killed in a car accident there.
I can't imagine how devastating that must have been for you to be so far away and to lose your precious husband.
Yes, it was one of those things that if you looked ahead, you say, I can't do this. But when it happens, you realize God is with you. I had gone ahead of him to Canada with the children, so we were all in Canada when we got the news. The Canadian embassy was absolutely wonderful in helping make the arrangements to bring his body back to Edmonton, which was really important because he'd had a sister die years before, and his family needed to bring closure. And so we saw God's hand even in that we had all said goodbye to him together and could bring his body back.
So at that point, how did you find the strength to carry on? Like, how did God take you the next step? Because you're still in mission work.
Well, I think just the little things that happen every day. The day of the funeral, 3 people sent me a note or spoke to me or called me and said, you know this verse, they shall mount up on wings like eagles, was several people sent that to me, 3 of them actually, and I thought, so often God speaks in threes. And I thought of the place where he died. The car had gone over the precipice of a cliff, and where a road went down the mountain. And when I went back 6 months later, I went back a month after to continue my work, because having been a pediatric nurse and being with families through grieving, I realized that I needed to go back and bring closure there. And so then I felt that was important for my children too. And when my son came back, he said, I just need to sit alone on the edge of the cliff where Dad died. And this big bird was hovering above his head. And so then I shared with the kids about this verse and what it meant to me, and they said, oh, Mom, there are no eagles in Africa. And it was several years later that I was reading and read that the original word in the Bible actually meant vulture, and we did have vultures in Africa.
Wow.
And so I think that you know, it's those kinds of things, that seeing God in those everyday things that happen, and just causing me to then say, God, what is it you want me to see in this day and in the people that I meet?
And actually, God was very present with you just months after Hank's death, when you yourself were given a difficult diagnosis from the doctor.
That's true. Well, it was just weeks after Hank died that I had a lump in my breast, and it grew extremely quickly. And so he died in July, and it was Christmas time, where they actually thought I had metastasis, that I not only had this lump, but that it had metastasized. But it turned out that it was a mistake on the x-ray, or someone giving a phone call saying they saw something near the scapula when they meant clavicle. And so it meant it was an old scar that was showing up on an x-ray. But my son always said to me, Mom, wasn't that God's gift to you? Because after that, your surgery was nothing. It was, you know, you faced it like you would be going to the dentist. And I think that's true.
And now you have become a gift to so many others, and actually giving your life to help out the needy in helping to found the Food Resource Bank. And tell us a little bit about that, and in a moment we'll look at some pictures as well.
Okay, well, you know, it kind of has a little bit of a history in Canada. The idea really started with three farmers in Manitoba in the early 80s who had bumper crops, and consequently wheat prices were low, a lot of media coverage of hunger in Ethiopia, and they said, you know, let's see how we can do something about this. And they approached Mennonite Central Committee, who then was part of inviting other denominations to join in the Canadian Food Grains Bank. Now, having grown up in Alberta and having seen the farmers around Nearlandia get in the Guinness Book of World Records for the shortest time of harvesting a quarter section of land, I understand the record's been broken since, but having had that history and seeing the potential in the United States and working in West Africa and seeing the challenges of trying to find resources to help people be able to grow their own crops rather than having to wait for a handout was part of what inspired me to join a meeting to look at, should we start a similar organization in the United States. So it was part of a group of people who in 1999 formed the Foods Resource Bank, and it has since grown to 15 member organizations, and for me it is a tremendous blessing to work with the staff from those organizations on what they can agree on. They have a lot of theological differences, but can agree that people should have the privilege to feed their families with dignity and live in the image that God created them to be.
They all have the same heart of Jesus. They might have different labels on their churches. Let's look at a few pictures, and you can just share a little bit about what
different
what some of the
countries. Now, where is
places,
this one?
This one is India, and this was being greeted in a village where we have supported the communities there in doing some of their own initiatives, particularly involving women. So women, I remember a story of a woman telling me, I'm no longer afraid to walk out in the street if there's a man walking down it at the other end, because I realize that I have worth too and I have gifts.
And then another is, where is this?
This one is in Armenia, and one of the staff there took us to the local market, and I was just marveling in the artistry that people do in creating. This was a basket of fruit and nuts, but it's like a piece of artwork, and they actually do little crosses out of peach pits that were just wonderful there.
And where is this?
This is in West Bank, where people are really struggling just to have a living, but so generous with the last little bit of food that they have, even in their poverty, sharing their very best.
And one final picture.
This one is in Guatemala. We really want to honor the abilities of people in places that they are, and so we took a group early this spring to help people on a project that they wanted to do, and they really needed organic fertilizer because they can't afford the chemicals, and to transport them up and down the mountains, very steep mountains, is really difficult. So I spent a day or two just chopping grass into short enough pieces that they would
Practical
decay.
stuff, very practical stuff.
Well, Bev, you visited, I believe it's 90 countries of the world, and you've helped out in so many ways, and God has brought you from some of the, the broken pieces of your life after such terrible tragedy, but you've allowed Him to just bring you to blossom, to bless so many others, and so you're an inspiration to many that are probably watching right now. Some may be going through a very difficult time, wondering if can God really use me, or can I get back on track with my life? And the answer is yes. And here's a shining example. Thank you, Bev, for coming by.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. It's been my
bless
honor.
you.